Less than a year into a global pandemic, and we have a veritable feast of vaccines to choose from. Bravo! Beleaguered governments and big pharma companies have gladly wallowed in the praise.
The UK was the first country in the world to pre-order supplies of this Pfizer vaccine.
But they don't mention the racist human experiments much. Right, so you've probably heard about high levels of vaccine skepticism among some BAME communities and black African populations. It's a big problem, so big that politicians and celebrities from those groups have been campaigning to encourage people to get the jab.
Taking the vaccine is the only way to boost your immunity against COVID for you and your loved ones.
A COVID-19 vaccine that will help save lives.
The vaccine does not change or damage our DNA.
But why the skepticism? Theories include misinformation, religious factors, and language barriers. Oh, and those racist human experiments. A long and gruesome history of them that mean many people of colour don't trust governments and big pharma when it comes to taking drugs.
I think these messages from Boris, from Matt Hancock, from Whitehall, all actually have lost the meaning, and the public doesn't trust anymore.
The most infamous American example is the 1932 Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male. The US Public Health Service duped 600 poor black men into taking part in this 6-month study that lasted for 40 years. Told that they would get free health care, the 399 participants with latent syphilis were neither told of their diagnosis nor given any treatment. I guess the clue was in the name. It caused the death of 128 men.
A 40-year study that rocked the American medical establishment. A panel who reviewed that study found hundreds of impoverished blacks were misled.
Tuskegee is the tip of the iceberg. You have James Marion Sims, the father of gynecology, who used slave women and children in 19th century Virginia to develop medical treatments. Treatments which were then only used on white women, obviously. In the 40s, the US infected Guatemalan prisoners, mental patients, and soldiers with syphilis in order to test the effectiveness of penicillin against the disease. In the 50s, Project 4.1 used residents of the Marshall Islands to examine the effects of radiation on the human body. The unfortunate islanders just happened to be a bit too close to an American nuclear test.
The most powerful nuclear device ever detonated by the US, codenamed Bravo. It was a 15-megaton hydrogen bomb. The radioactive fallout blew right onto 2 inhabited atolls downwind.
Of course, it's not exclusively an American practice. Africa, for example, has been used as a living lab by many nations and companies.
I'm sure you must be asking yourselves what makes developing countries, especially those in sub-Saharan Africa, so attractive for these HIV clinical trials. Reasons include lower risk of litigation, less rigorous ethical reviews, and populations that are willing to participate in almost any study that hints at a cure.
At the turn of the 20th century, German scientist Eugen Fischer conducted forced sterilization experiments on Namibian women. You'll be shocked to learn that Fischer later went on to join the Nazi Party, where he continued his work in concentration camps. In the 1970s, black Zimbabwean women were coerced into taking part in trials for the birth control drug Depo-Provera. In the 90s, HIV-positive Zimbabweans were recruited without informed consent for a study that led to an estimated 1,000 babies contracting HIV/AIDS. Also in the 90s, Nigerian children were used to test the effectiveness of the antibiotic Trovan on meningitis. 11 of the children died, and the Nigerian government sued the pharmaceutical company responsible. The name of that company? Pfizer. And you wonder why some black people might be a little bit wary of using a vaccine with that name on it. But surely no one would consider making Africans guinea pigs for a COVID vaccine, right? Not in the 2020s.
Est-ce qu'on ne devrait pas faire cette étude en Afrique, où il n'y a pas de masque, pas de traitement, pas de réanimation? Qu'est-ce que vous en pensez?
Alors vous avez raison, et d'ailleurs on est en train de réfléchir en parallèle à une étude en Afrique justement pour faire ce même type d'approche avec le BCG, un placebo.
Mon Dieu, In India, 2,500 people died between 2005 and 2012 as a result of dodgy testing on unregistered drugs. The country's Supreme Court accused the government of being negligent in curbing illegal clinical trials. It shows that the abuses aren't always white on black, but it's always the powerful using the powerless as lab rats.
The end of the punishment reinforces the response.
The current skepticism may be misplaced, but it's not completely irrational. This isn't a single evil regime like the Nazis carrying out these experiments. And while white people have been experimented on too, not as much, and not because they're white. What we have here is a long and consistent pattern of inhumanity, exploitation, and racism. That stuff gets ingrained in communities. And the cruel irony? Racial and ethnic groups who are already far more likely to be killed and hospitalized by COVID-19 will suffer because of the fear that's been instilled in them.